Here we are. Okay, good evening. This evening's session, then, we're going to be having a look at an introduction to passage planning. We will be taking a look at these objectives. So the requirements of passage planning, what are the actual requirements of what do you need to do? Are you obliged to have a passage plan? Are there any rules about you having a passage plan? So we'll take a little bit of a look at some of the MCA guidance around that. We'll look at the 4 different stages of passage planning then. So Apem, Appraise, Plan, Execute, and Monitor. What makes a good passage plan, and some sources of information for passage planning as to where you can get some of that from. And hopefully I will also be able to show you a couple of the online tools that you can have a look at to use as well as we go. Okay. So first up then, what I want to take a look at really is the difference between pilotage and passage planning. So when we talk about pilotage, we're talking about our ability to get out of A and into B. So get out of where we are departing from and get into where we are going to. So that is a smaller plan. A pilotage plan tends to be more of a sketch plan. And we can plan also, if we need to, for getting into any of our planned refuges. So this is very much about how would I really get in and out of places? What do I need to consider? Where are the rocks? Where are the navigation aids and so on and so forth? What are the safe navigation routes? What are my safe routes into somewhere? What hazards do I need to avoid? And knowing where I am getting in and out of somewhere. And this, I believe, is fairly looking at being able to get out from the marina here all the way out into the sea. When we look then at our passage planning or voyage planning, we're looking at a whole description of the vessel's voyage from start to finish. So this is where we look at our departure, we look at our en route, and we look at our arrival and mooring. So I tend to think of it as going from berth to berth, okay? So whether we're going from berth from A to B in a nice straight line, or whether we're doing a little bit more of a journey like this, where perhaps we're either getting a little bit lost, or we're tending to go out and have a little bit of a sail around and then head into B, okay? So my passage plan is what I would say is the old-fashioned of when I used to go on a car journey, of when I would have used my road atlas, and my pilotage is when I would have used my A to Z. So for those of you who are old enough to remember that, you'd use your A to Z perhaps to get yourself out of a city onto a main road, and then you would have used your road atlas to get you up the main road to the next place. So that's my passage plan, and that's my pilotage, okay? So what are the actual regulations? Do I have to do it? Yeah, is there something that says I really should or I must? So we're going to take a quick look then at the SOLAS Regulation 34. This is the most relevant one to what we're talking about tonight. And this is where it says, prior to proceeding to sea, the master shall ensure that the intended voyage has been planned using the appropriate nautical charts and nautical publications for the areas concerned, taking into account guidelines and recommendations developed by the organization. Well, the organization can be your shipping company, or it could be your center, your RTC, if you're teaching, or it could just be you. So if you're your own boat and you're doing your own sailing, the organization is you and what you believe that you should be doing. And what it actually says then is that we have to identify a route which takes into account any relevant ship's routing systems. So what do we have? Ensures the sufficient sea room for the safe passage of the ship throughout the entire voyage, anticipates all known navigational hazards and adverse weather conditions, and also takes into account any marine environmental protection measures that apply, so that we can avoid any damage to the environment. And that's obviously great if we're a great big tanker and we're only allowed in certain places, but actually what's really important for us, if we think slightly smaller boating, it takes into account the fact that we have sufficient sea room for the safe passage of the ship from start to finish, so throughout the voyage, okay? Particularly looking at all known navigational hazards and adverse weather. Now, all is a really big word. Can you really look at all known navigational hazards, okay? You can certainly look at the major navigational hazards that you would be looking at, and you can have a really good look at your weather, and we did weather a couple of weeks ago, looking at our weather as well. So what are the actual regulations then? So the MCA has produced some guidance, and it's guidance for voyage planning, MGM 166. And what does it actually tell us? Well, it says that even if we're talking small vessels and pleasure craft, that the degree of voyage planning, the degree of voyage planning will be dependent on the size of the vessel, its crew, and the length of the voyage. It's also dependent on you and how much interest or how much you want to put into doing that passage plan. Some people will do the passage plan on the back of a proverbial cigarette packet where they've just sort of gone, yeah, we're going to go from A to B. Some people will plan to within an inch of their life. It depends how much of a risk taker you are. But I think that there are some good lines around the fact that you are supposed to be making a careful assessment of the proposed voyage, taking into account dangers to navigation, your weather forecast, tidal predictions, and other relevant factors, including the competence of the crew. And I'll come up with some of those areas specifically when we look at the different areas of Apem. It also talks about proceeding to sea. So a voyage plan, passage plan is required when we're proceeding to sea, which for most of the time means beyond categorized waters. We sit in categorized waters here in the Bristol Channel, for example. If I am proceeding to sea, I'm going outside of that categorized waters and beyond any harbour limits. But realistically, this is about giving me an idea of what is going to happen to me. It's the story of what I expect to happen on my journey. So when we take a look at Apem then, Apem has sort of moved more into leisure boating. It was very much a sort of commercial side of thing. It's moved much more into leisure boating. It's now a critical part of the RYA shore-based courses as well. And we'll start with the A. So we're going to look at doing an appraisal. So this is looking at all available information. So information about your boat, information about your crew, what do we think the weather is going to be doing, what are we doing with tides, particularly relevant here where we have the second highest tidal range in the world? What sort of route are we looking to take? What are those hazards? What are the passage times that we're expecting, and what are the overall aids to navigation? And your appraisal is an initial look-see. We'll do a little bit more about it in a second, but an initial look-see. You'll notice there's no plan in there. There's no planning in that particular term. So your appraisal is for you to take a quick appraisal of all of these things and decide whether it is worth planning your trip, yes or no. Because when I go to my plan, now I start to get into a little bit more information. So I look at my pilotage plans for departure and arrival. I start to get a little bit more down on paper. I start to look at some constraints. What constraints do I have about arrival times, about departure times? Am I going somewhere that has a bar over which I need to sail? Or perhaps here, like we have lock gates that only operate at certain times. Have I got constraints as to when I can actually access or exit from the places I am going from and to? What about critical times such as some tidal gates? Are there specific tidal gates that I need to make to get around a headland? Or are there specific tidal gates that I really don't want to meet on the journey because they will be creating some pretty rubbish tides that will be difficult to sail through? I look at my pilotage plans. I start to get my pilotage plans down on paper, and I look at my ports of refuge, and I look at a track load on the best scale chart that I have. And this is really where I start putting lines on charts. My appraisal, I'm starting to get a lot of information together. My plan is where I start to make it look like something that I could reasonably use. So then I move on to the execute. So hopefully, having done my appraisal and my plan, the answer is that we're going to go sailing. I then get to go sailing and I look at executing the passage that I have put together. So I make the passage according to the plan. There is no point making a plan, going out of somewhere and saying, well, our plan is to go out of here and turn left and go to wherever. If you go out of there and turn right, what was the point of making the plan if you don't follow it? Okay, so you're trying to make your passage according to your plan, taking into account the prevailing conditions. And by that, I could be looking at what changes might I need to make depending on sea state, depending on weather, and so on. But it is a living document. I might need to make some changes if I cannot access where I want to, or if the sea state, like I say, or the weather isn't sufficient for me to go. And whilst I'm doing that, I'm monitoring it. So I have to monitor the progress against the plan or the planned route. Part of my plan, I will start to put some checkpoints in, some waypoints. I will have some estimated times of arrivals at those waypoints. How am I doing on that? Am I actually achieving what I set out to do? If I'm going in a motorboat and I've planned to do everything at 20 knots to make the maths nice and easy for me, did that work? Or did I get out there and find that actually the most I can make today, because it's a little bit lumpy, is 15 knots and I need to replan all of my times? So I can progress again, I can check my progress against the plan, and in doing that, I'm checking my vessel's position. So I'm checking my vessel's position using Dead Reckoning Nav. I'm looking out of the window for going past certain navigational points. I'm using my electronic nav. I can use my celestial nav if I'm going a little bit further afield, and I can check on my pilotage. And the monitor really is it going according to plan, yes or no? So let's break them down a little bit more, and let's start off with our appraisal. So again, I say the appraisal is basic research. Okay? There is no point planning a voyage only to discover that you cannot even get into the harbour that you plan to visit because you've missed a tidal gate, or it's too shallow, or it's inaccessible. And it should never take longer to plan than it does to do. Okay, I often watch students, particularly when we're going sort of yachtmaster students or advanced powerboat students, and say, put me together a passage plan. It should not take longer than it does to do. If you're going out for an hour's sail, it shouldn't take you 4 or 5 hours to plan it. So what have we got on the right hand side here? Well, we've got some aids that we can use for our appraisal. What sort of vessel do we have? How far am I going to get in this vessel? What sort of charts do I need? Okay. What sort of navigational books do I need? So what sort of pilot books? What almanac do I want? Is my plan realistic? This probably isn't a realistic plan if we look at all the waypoints in the bottom here for the vessel at the top. Okay. What about my crew? Are my crew up for this? Okay. And what's the weather going to do in the sea state? Are we really ready for this journey? So I have a quick look of, and for me, I always teach it as should we go, can we go? So let's take a look at should we go. Is the weather suitable both for the outbound and the return journey? Is the boat suitable? Are the crew really up for this voyage? And can we do it in the time we have? Okay, that's my should we go. Okay, these are easy things to have a look at before you really get into lines on charts or digging tidal information out and so on and so forth. Is the boat suitable for the trip that we're doing? And is the crew up for the voyage? Am I taking my family and friends out and they're expecting a nice, you know, gin and tonic kind of sail, when actually I take them out and it's very horrendous and everybody hates it? So is it realistic for this boat and this crew to go to sea to do that plan? So having thought, should we go, then I think, can we go? So this is where I start to put a little bit more information down there. So how far is it? Are there any restrictions on getting out of where I am? What about restrictions getting in? If I look at an example passage plan to get out of Portishead here to say get around the coast of Swansea, I know that it's about a 4-hour trip. We're looking at it being around about a 60-mile trip if I talk about it in motor cruising. And I also know that there's some significant restrictions on getting out of Portishead from a locking perspective, but also when the locks are open getting into Swansea. So I'm already giving myself some idea of if I have to be at Swansea, particularly in the winter time where I have to be there by 7 o'clock in the evening, that's the last lock in, then I need to take that 7 o'clock and I need to work backwards to say, okay, if I need to be there by that time, what time realistically do I need to leave? Okay, and can I do it in the time that I have? Are there any restrictions en route? Are there any serious shallows or hazards that I need to worry about? Will I have a favourable tide? What I tend to do is to say, take my high water -6 to high water +6, put some ticks and crosses in the boxes underneath them. When is it favourable? When is it not favourable? Is there a plan B? If I'm going from A to B, so if I'm traveling, say, from Portishead around to Swansea, 4-hour trip around a couple of headlands, we've got a fair few hazards, Nash Sands and Scarweather Sands and so on coming across Swansea Bay. What is my plan B? What if I, for some reason, cannot get to where I want to go? Where can I put into? So are my refuges available all of the time? And again, I tend to do a bit of a RAG score, a red, amber, green. A green refuge would be great pretty much in any weather, easily accessible, dead easy to get into, no difficult navigation, perhaps a marina or a really good anchorage with some facilities. Maybe an amber one, I might have to think about it. Maybe there's a little bit of a restriction. Maybe it's a tricky entrance. Maybe I don't want to go there particularly in the dark. And then my red score would be really complicated, difficult navigation to get in, loads of tidal restrictions, really complicated place to go, definitely don't want to go in the dark. So I have a list of my refuges and I can easily look at them if I have to change my plan, or if something goes wrong and I need to divert into somewhere, I can look at it and go, this is a green refuge. This means it will be relatively easy for me to get in there. But also on my can we go, do we have the right equipment and supply? So do we have the right equipment on board for this particular passage, and have we got sufficient supplies in order to get there? And again, like I say, that appraisal is really, should we go, can we go, and am I going to bother doing that passage plan? I haven't really drawn any lines on charts. I've perhaps taken my dividers and just worked out how far it is. I've had a quick look following it down. So I followed the route all the way down with my finger and said, actually, no, this looks good. There's no hazard. Oh, this looks a bit hazardous. And I've started to make a note of those things. So my passage plan here is a quick checklist. Now, there are a million things that you could put onto a passage plan. Here are just some of them. So I need to look at how far it's actually going to be. Okay, I've decided that, say it's a 60-mile trip. I'll put it head to Swansea, roughly about 60 miles. What time do I need to arrive and depart? So am I meeting a tidal gate to get in and out of somewhere? Do I want to arrive at a particular time and therefore I have to work backwards? What sort of weather am I going to expect? So what is the weather going to do to me today on this trip or tomorrow on this trip? And what about the weather coming back? Am I going to make a one-way trip where the weather's brilliant getting there, but then it's absolutely horrendous for the next however many days and I get stuck somewhere? So how long will it actually take me? And what do I need to then consider around any tidal gates, any restrictions, any locks, any bars to get over, all that kind of information. And from that, I can start to say, okay, well, what sort of course to steer do I want to start considering? This is where I start to put some lines on charts. What are my hazards en route? So my course to steer might have to take me around a particular hazard. So have I got some tidal races, some overfalls? Are there any particular danger areas? If I am sailing somewhere where there is quite a lot of shipping, am I allowed in that shipping lane? Is there a TSS, a traffic separation scheme? All these kinds of things start to say, how might that affect my route? So following the route from start to finish, what are the things that are going to upset my route that might mean I have to reroute? And where are the areas that I absolutely cannot go? What about my pilotage plans then? I might put my pilotage plans together for getting out of A and getting into B, both considering daytime and nighttime. If I'm sailing, I'm really interested in then, can I sustain the course that I have planned if the wind shifts? Okay. Or if the wind drops and I'm going to have to motor, is that reasonably a doable trip? Or if I know that the wind might start to drop, have I got somewhere else to go? So where can I go to? What are my refuges? What are my bolt holes? And this is where, like I say, I score them red, amber, green. Green, absolutely brilliant. Probably can get in there daytime, nighttime, absolutely no worries. All the way through to red, going to be really complicated. We're going to have to think about it. My fuel and my supplies, there's no point only having enough fuel to get there if there isn't sufficient fuel or isn't somewhere where I can get fuel when I get there. Not everywhere serves diesel, not everywhere serves petrol for sure. And what about my crew? Is this really what they were expecting? Is it where I am looking at poor weather perhaps getting better? That's probably a much better way, because it's much easier to motivate your crew if you say, well, it's going to be a little bit bumpy for the first hour or so, but don't worry, it'll all drop off and it will be much better, rather than having a beautiful sail for a good couple of hours and then it all blowing up and then everybody's really got into it and then the weather's rubbish and the sea's rubbish. So what about my crew? Are they expecting this? But most crew, can I manage with my crew that I have? If I'm doing a longer journey, have I got some watch leaders? Are they good enough to be a watch leader? Could I leave them in charge of the vessel and go and have a sleep if I'm on a longer journey? Could I say to them, this is what I want you to do, this is how I want you to navigate? What then about any documentation, particularly if I'm looking at going a little bit further afield? So if I'm perhaps heading across the channel, what about the documentation for the individuals, any passports, any licenses? What about the boat documents? So have I got my boat documentation to say that I've got my certificate of ownership? Have I got a VAT bill and so on, any radio licenses? And then what navigation information do I want to take with me? So charts, pilot books, atlases. You know, a good boat's going to have some sort of library on board, but we can't take everything afloat with us. And we've got so many electronic devices now that you can almost get information anywhere. But there's still something to be said for having hard paper charts and a hard paper pilot book, just in case. Yeah, you never quite know when you're going to need them. And then what about my communications? Have a communications plan from start to finish. Who do I need to talk to depart? Who do I need to talk to en route? Who do I need to talk to when I arrive? Maybe I don't need to talk to anybody. Maybe I'm on a marina where I can just literally go sailing without, say, for example, here having to talk to the marina for a lockout. Who do I need to listen to as well? Not just who do I need to talk to. So if I am departing from somewhere where there's a significant amount of shipping, what is the shipping channel? So here, for example, I would be listening to Bristol VTS, Vessel Traffic Service, to understand what sort of shipping I have got coming up and down the channel. So I'm improving my seamanship and I'm improving the knowledge that I will have to understand where vessels will have cooling points, where I might reasonably understand that I'm going to meet a car carrier once I come around the point. So it's not a definitive list, but it's not a bad list to have a go at. Once I've got my passage plan together, how do I put it? Well, this is an example that we did a couple of years ago when I took a cruising company. It was only from here to Cardiff, but for some, that was the first time they'd really been on that particular trip. And what you'll see is I put together the idea that they can put their vessels in, the number of persons on board, the date, the passage, their ETD, so the time of departure, the ETA, the distance, the speed, and what the suggested charts were going to be. I've done some idea around the restrictions, for example, here. So the restrictions are the lock times to get out of Portishead, the barrage when we get into Cardiff has a bit, you know, it's 24 hours a day, great, and to monitor shipping in the King Road, which is our shipping channel here. Then about my communications, I'm writing it down because sometimes you have to say I'm a bear of simple brain. And actually, if it all gets a little bit fraught and it all gets a little bit bumpy and things don't quite go according to plan, don't rely on your brain to remember. It may have been really easy while you were sat at your desk table or your dining room table putting all of this down. Say, of course I'll remember that. But will you really? We're bears of simple brain, so get it written down somewhere. Probably the best way to do it. What's my weather doing and what's the weather outlook? So what forecast areas am I even looking in? What's my wind doing, my sea state, my weather, and my visibility, whether I'm taking that from the inshore waters or whether I'm taking that from a different online source, perhaps. So this was an idea of page 1 that they had. Oh, and then page 2, this is what the actual passage plan looks like. We did it in some simple legs. And in this particular one, we wrote it down in a table going across. So leg 1 was going from buoy to buoy. We were pretty much buoy hopping down the channel. I've written the course in, I've written the distance, I've left the speed and duration blank for now because that would have depended on the day. But most interestingly, I'm looking at my notes. So this is the notes and any things I really need to consider. I've used some fairly easy shorthand. So these is, like I say, going from buoy to buoy. Equally, it could be a waypoint where I'd be putting the latitude and the longitude in. But I've got all of these written down and I've got all my notes. So for every one of these legs, I have been down the leg and said, I'm going to go on this particular heading. I'm going to travel for this particular distance. And if my speed is 20 knots, it's going to take me this amount of time. But most interestingly, the notes say, what do I need to worry about? And think of it almost a bit like becoming one of those tour guides on one of the open top buses. You know, on this particular leg, we're going to go from the Newcombe buoy, which is a port hand lateral, to the Welsh hook buoy, which is a southerly cardinal. Our heading will be 245 degrees. We're looking at a distance of 3.5 nautical miles, and we will have the main channel to port. Okay, and again, you can start to read through it and you can start to see what am I interested in. Well, here I've got a drying height off to my starboard side and my main channel is to port. So I'm already giving myself an idea that what I don't want to do is allow my course to become too far pushed off to starboard because there is a big drying height there. I can have where I'm crossing the channel perhaps if I'm crossing the shipping channel, so give way to shipping. I can also put some waypoints in. I can also have some interesting other buoys as well. But it just gives you an idea of how I can write it down. Some people also want to write it as a rolling road. It very much depends on whether you want to read across or whether you want to read it as you read down the piece of paper. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. When I'm afloat, then I'm into my execution and my monitoring, and it's difficult to do execution and monitoring sitting at a desk. But effectively, what am I interested in for my execution? I should always be considering whether or not I'm doing any speed adjustments. So adjustments for weather, adjustments for sea state, adjustments for wind, adjustments for my engines. Have I been able to make the point of sale that I wanted? Have I been able to make the speed that I wanted? Has something happened if I'm a twin engine vessel? Am I only on one engine? Yeah. Am I still going to make those timings that I put down? How accurate was my departure time? You know, a lot of people will say, right, we're definitely going to slip the lines at 8:30. And at 9:15, we're just about slipping the lines because it didn't quite go according to plan. And, you know, someone wanted a wee before we left, and then someone hadn't got their bag, and someone had left something in the car, and so on and so forth. So how accurate has your timing actually been? And if it hasn't been accurate, what is the big impact on my arrival time? Okay. If for some reason I haven't been able to make the speed that I wanted or depart when I wanted, have I got to change my plan? Can I still make my plan? Can I still get into B wherever B might be? And what are the ways that I can monitor this? Well, I can check my position. I can use traditional DR nav. I can use some eNav, GPS. I can have my logbook nicely filled in here. I can even get my good old sextant out and have a look at doing some sites, but I can fix my position at regular intervals. So I'm looking at fixing my position every hour or so. So I'm never really more than 1 hour lost. That's what I'm interested in. What do my log entries say? Are they starting to give me any trends? Is the pressure starting to drop? Am I starting to see an increase in some temperatures? You know, when I look at the T's and P's, so what are my T's and P's all the way across the boat? What about safe distance from hazards? Have I been able to maintain that safe distance? If I was trying to avoid a headland and some overfalls, have I been able to avoid that, or has the tide of the wind pushed me a little bit off course? Have I deviated from my planned track? Because it's okay to, as long as it was part of your plan, as long as you know I can deviate from my planned track by this many cables. I can go no more than a couple of cables off here because I will then be towards a drying height or too close to a headland or something like that. So that's my execution and my monitoring. Okay, so when we put that all together, we end up with our passage plan. But one of the really important things is, who knows that we are at sea? So if you haven't already used the RYA Safe Tracks app, I would absolutely suggest it. New route monitoring and alerting app, saying new, it's quite, it's been around for a little while now, replacing the old Coast Guard CG66 scheme. You can put your route in, you can enter your estimated time of arrival, you can designate an emergency contact, the route is stored, it can be monitored by the app then, and it can alert the designated emergency contacts if your ETA is exceeded. Okay, your emergency contact could then call the Coast Guard, who would be able to see your vessel's position via the app, but it does require a mobile phone signal. Okay, I've got the link there. Let me just. So this just gives you an idea of what you can get from the online account from the Safe Tracks. This is just an example of a trip that we did fairly recently, and this was on one of our school ribs. We were going out doing a night exercise. This was actually an advanced course for students doing their planning. You may be able to see the little arrow just going up and down showing me on there. I can click onto an area, I can find out what speed I was doing, what my heading was, and so on and so forth. What it doesn't do on here, not sharing. Okay, bear with me. Resume share. Now you should be able to see it. Okay. Fab. Okay, there we go. So this just gives you a bit of an idea. This was a short trip we did one evening out of Portishead, up the River Avon, up to an unlit spot there, back down the river and back to another unlit spot here for my two students. Okay, so I can go through my various trips. I can also have a look at various stats, but it's really designed to be an app. So it's there's more information on the actual app than there is on the website, but it does just give you an idea of different trips. I can have a look. This was the previous day, I think, when we were the same day when we were going down a little bit further down the coast. So you can actually hold all your information. But one of the most important things really is that idea that if you say I will be home at 1900 and you're not, it will start to escalate a series of text messages to your emergency, to you in the first place, but to your emergency contacts. So if something has happened, then the Coast Guard would reasonably be able to find your last known position. So, bear with me. For those of you who use Windy, and I know we talked about it on our weather sessions, if you use Windy, it also has a small route planning capability. and you'll find the route planning capability. You can all see windy, right? Yep, fab, thank you. Okay, so under here, I actually get distance and planning. So I can go into distance and planning. I can click to add some waypoints. So let's just say we were getting a bit adventurous and we were heading off to Dublin. Okay, I can turn it into a boat. I can decide that my speed is going to be 15 knots. I've got down at the bottom here, and I can see that it's worked out that if I'm doing 15 knots, it thinks it will take about this amount of time, and I can start to have a look at the weather. So I can move the weather, and I can start to see what that means if I was going to go this weekend. So if I was planning on going on Sunday, what the predicted weather would be. So it's also giving me some good information. I can also pop extra waypoints in if I want to, and I'm already getting an idea of how far that overall trip is. So 360, so this is giving me a total of 370 kilometers. You can turn it into nautical miles if you want to, but 370 kilometers, and I can actually have a go at planning on what would the trip look like. Let's say we were going to go on Friday. It's not looking great, okay? Unless I'm looking for some serious weather, I'm getting quite a lot of wind, and I'm getting some pretty big wind gusts as well. So quite a lot of rain. My waves are up at 3.5 meters, so probably not a trip. So it's a really easy way of saying, this is my trip, perhaps when would the best day be for me to go? It's a really useful tool. And then zoom shut. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of some of the online tools as well. What were tonight's objectives? Then we had a quick look at the requirements of passage planning. We also took a look at the 4 different stages, what they mean. So appraise, plan, execute, and monitor. What makes a good passage plan? We gave you a little bit of a checklist around the things that you would like to consider and the sources of information that you could find for passage planning. So including online tools, you've got charts, you've got your pilot books, you've got local guidance from your marinas or from your harbours, all manner of information. So just to finish up then, our next sessions then, we have a weather workshop planned for this Saturday, 9:30 till 12:30. We also have an introduction to pilotage, which is next Tuesday, and that's one of our free sessions. The weather workshop will be £50 for the session on this coming Saturday. So thank you very much for listening this evening.